Okay, anybody see what's wrong with this picture? So in the live stream, there's a brochure with things you can rip off, and it's placed on... Yes, it's placed on the inside of the car. So there's information there, but it's not very accessible. So accessibility fail. How about this one? Now this picture here has this gentleman going up a ramp. It's a wheelchair ramp. For those that can't see it in a live stream, it's a ramp that's at a pretty steep angle. So what I like about this diagram, this image, is the intent for accessibility is there, but the implementation didn't quite make it. Does this sound familiar? I mean, I've been in projects where we really mean well. We want to do the best that we can, but sometimes when it comes to implementation, we didn't quite get there. So accessibility is really about trying to design things so it works for everyone. Yeah, I'm going to start throwing over to you guys now. Maybe I'll start a warm up with Rhiannon. So Rhiannon works with me, and she's been doing accessibility stuff for a long time, particularly with people with disabilities and usability testing. So Rhiannon, I'm going to pass it to you to share your favourite tip about accessibility.
So I think the most important thing is actually getting people with disability involved in your testing. There's only so much we can kind of try and interpret from the guidelines, but actually seeing somebody struggle to use a software or a website, it's a light bulb moment, and it can really help you figure out where the high priority issues are. So that's my tip. I'll be passing this around. Oh, also, if anybody needs to leave, please see me, because I have to let you out. So you can't escape.
Thanks, Rhiannon. So Rhiannon was talking about testing with people with disabilities. You know, often we do tests against WCAG, but what happens when you test with people with disabilities? You identify a lot of other kind of issues. So does anybody have any experience doing that, or any tips when you tried that, or have you tried it? Who's actually tried testing people with disabilities? We've got 3 different departments. Sorry, I wouldn't mention departments. We've got 3 different organisations here involved in that. So what was your experience? Danny, I might hand this mic over to you.
Ours was a little out of the ordinary in that we went out, like everybody before us, to try and get people in the organisation that used assistive technologies. And the response that we got back was, people keep asking me to do this stuff. This is not my job. I'm actually employed to do a job, not to do your testing for you. So there was actually a little bit of resistance. So one of the things to be careful about is to not go to the same people time and again and sort of interfere with their work, I guess.
We used professional users, but what we did was we built up a relationship with their managers in the first instance and worded their managers in about what we expected them to do, how it would help the organisation, and we got their buy-in, so it made it easier to get their time away from their normal job.
So your experience, was it good, bad with testing people with disabilities?
Yeah, it wasn't bad. We actually had people that were enthusiastic and weren't resistant, but yeah, it was just a couple of handful of people that would just try to test the waters with, so yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, Noah, I'll just hand that over to you.
Thanks. I have a couple of colleagues that are very proficient screen reader users. So just a tip, when you ask people like that to do your testing for you, they can often work around some of the issues that your website or whatever might have. So that's why, yeah, we always keep in mind, get like an average user, so you get your feedback on that the website is actually not working, and not that they can just work around what they're normally used to do. So
that's a really good tip. Not all users are the same. So if we're having one result, it doesn't mean everyone else is going to have necessarily the same kind of result. Okay, I'm trying to find who else would like to volunteer a tip. I shall look over there. Danny, back to Danny. Do you want to try?
Sometimes when you can't find, because we had trouble finding people that were willing to help out, because we only had a few people in the organisation that were assistive technology users. I think we had 11 screen reader users, and 10 of those were actually screen magnifier users. Yeah, sure. Yep.
As a developer, you start off, and if you've got in your mind at the beginning, as you're tweaking something to make it look nice, as you change a heading, you change a paragraph, that kind of thing, just tweak it for accessibility as well, and just keep going through that same thing as you go. And don't leave it till the end and try and make the whole thing accessible afterwards, because it's boring, it's dull, and it's hard. That's how I go about it.
I had a similar thing to say. I'm a designer, and I try to tell people to integrate it from the beginning, because if they do it at the end and they realise they haven't met any of the design considerations in WCAG, they are very, very sad. Whereas if they do it from the beginning, they can make the design better and they don't feel that it's a burden or a crutch that they have to deal with at the end.
I think at the end of the day, it's funny because nobody goes out to do bad code or bad designs. Like we're not there purposely going, I want to make this as inaccessible as possible. I haven't heard anybody say that. So I think it's a matter of empathy. Because at the end of the day, if you can empathise with the person who has to use your thing, or your product, or your service, it makes a difference. I mean, one I like to use is, when I start a session, I ask, hands up, anybody who has stopped aging? And somehow nobody's put up their hand yet. So I'm still waiting for the day. But it's interesting because when we age, we all get affected, whether it's some kind of cognitive impairment with dementia or our eyesight starts decreasing. And people can empathise with those kind of things. And I use that kind of a stepping stone into building a little bit of empathy there about what it means. And I think somebody suggested about screen readers, showing people what it sounds like. I think, Danny, you tend to use a lot of show and tell, don't you, in your kind of education sessions?
Yeah, you get a real epiphany from especially developers, because working in accessibility, it's like your job is to go around and tell people that their baby is ugly. You know, developers are insanely proud of their work, you know. So if you run around and slap a 40-page report down and say, here's all your problems, and that's all you do day in, day out, you're going to get a reputation. So you can leverage on the fact that the developers are proud of their work by showing them how other people interact with their baby. So you sit them down and you turn the screen off and try and get them to navigate stuff. And suddenly it's important to them because they see it as a quality issue rather than an accessibility compliance issue. And you know, you get those chin-scratching moments when they suddenly click and they get it.
I actually had the flip side. I was doing some developers and they were doing some excellent work on accessibility with this particular government website. And they had gone to the extreme effort to make sure a lot of interactive elements like the carousels and the drop-downs and the tabs were all accessible for screen readers. But what they forgot to test was for somebody who might not use a screen reader but very heavily keyboard dependent. So a lot of the tricks that they were putting in was working with screen readers. There was all these hidden things. But someone like me who's with RSI, I have trouble using mouse. So I was testing the stuff and the developer said, look, I can't actually use some of your stuff. And they go, but it works with screen readers, we tested it. I'm going, yes. And then I explained about how not every person uses a website. It might be necessarily a screen reader user or blind. And it was a bit of one of those moments when you take them through it and get them to actually do it. And it was a bit of a mind-blowing announcement. So I think that show and tell, building empathy is kind of very crucial.
Two components, turn the screen off and take their mouse away.
Yeah, things like RSI is something I use a lot. You know, it's something we can develop so easily. And I've had mine for over 11 years, and it's painful, and it's something that affects your computer usage. So to take the mouse away is a good tip. Okay, any other tips for that one? Oh, so people didn't bring our accessibility adjuster cards, the culture change cards.
Following on from that, sorry, Rhiannon here. I think practicing with ATs, kind of just to get used to what a screen reader sound like, and even if you're quite well practiced in it, they change. And I think NVDA brought out an update last year, and a bunch of the keyboard shortcuts changed. So practicing with keyboard or a screen magnifier or a screen reader, it's a really good way just to build that empathy, and you can then pass it on to other people. So yeah, practice.
And test with people and watch. Okay, any other tips with that one? It's a good question. I think the culture change stuff is hard in education. It's such a slow thing. And when I started off in the field, I was accessibility zealot. I would actually go around, I would get really upset when people just would not get things perfect. And it took me a while to realise that it's like what Mike was saying, slow, gradual kind of, you build upon it, do the minimum, keep making things better. And that's really helpful. Okay, we got a question from the Twitter again. What's the best simple explanation you can give of web accessibility? Oh, that's a good one. Who wants to have a shot answer that? So what, I guess you're trying to say, what is web accessibility? If you had to explain it to somebody, elevator pitch. So you've got 30 seconds, what is it?
So Andrew has replied.
Oh, I'll give you the mic. Nice.
Andrew has replied, I think that's right. Remove the impact of disability.
Remove the impact of disability. So make it focus on inclusiveness. Anybody else has got a nice take on how do you explain it to your bosses and to your colleagues?
We basically explain it as the absence of barriers. And in terms of barriers, we look at things like compatibility with assistive technologies, but also things that might present a problem if you're tired or you've got information overload or things like that, so that we cover off the cognitive aspects as well.
And slow internet, does that count? Cool. Anybody else got the fair explanation of accessibility? So if you get somebody who goes, what is this thing? Is it about a blind person using my website? No blind person uses my website. How do you go about explaining it? That's a favorite explanation. And maybe Danny's one would do really nicely, and I think this relates back to Andrew's about taking away barriers, makes it inclusive. It's funny, I think there's almost two camps in accessibility land, right? Those that say it's purely about people with disabilities and those that say it's about inclusiveness, so different views.
Yeah, that's actually the first word. I don't know. That's the first word that came to mind when you bring up that question right at the beginning. What is accessibility to people? It's sort of, yeah, inclusion. It's all by none. And if somebody with a vision impairment does happen upon your website and they can't access the information, then you failed to communicate. So that's it.
It's funny, isn't it? When people talk about disabilities, tend to think of it as kind of binary, that you either have a disability or you don't. But disabilities, or just access requirements, vary so greatly. And we all live in some kind of spectrum of a barrier that exists for us, could exist for any of us one day because you're tired or you broke your arm or something, to somebody who has quite high barriers due to cognitive function or so on. Yeah, so that's a really interesting.
I can't read text if there's something flashing on the screen. I can't read the text.
Is it just the distractingness of the flashing? So there's kind of like gifs that just go around.
It's just like I read the same sentence over and over.
How does that work with the moving carousels that a lot of people have on their websites?
Not too bad.
Okay. There's nothing carousels, such a design trend. Okay, any other burning questions? Yumi, you look like you've got a question there. We didn't answer you.
I guess the other thing was with the complex maps. Hi, just going back to another question on what to do with complex maps. So if you've got maps on Section C, Block 2, etc., or a map of Canberra and all the different land plots, how would you go about it? I think I saw something on one of the Canadian government sites, their web standard, and they exclude complex maps. So I don't know how you actually then get around that. Do you just exclude it and try the best to explain, but where it's just not going to make sense, do you just have a disclaimer, or any tips from Danny?
It's like the NTS. There's a section that talks about things where there's no real technical solution at the moment, and the idea of doing focus groups and looking into exploring the issue further. But in the meantime, something that you can do is answer the question, the question that the information is answering, rather than the format that the information is presented in. So you might have a map, and the purpose of the map is to tell someone how to get to a certain place. So you might give them directions from a local bus stop or a local landmark or something like that. Another one might be a map of a particular zone for a program or something like that. In which case, the question people are asking is, am I in the zone or am I not? So if you list the towns, you know, that sort of gives them the information that they're after without having to try and mimic the format that the information is presented in normally.
I think where it gets tricky is when you've got those maps with different overlays trying to show, you know, his deposit of sort of mineral overlaid with this one, and that starts getting super complex. I think people, anybody from geoscience here? Because you've got that, geoscience faces that issue all the time. I think they released the alternate information in tables to deal with that issue for now until there's a better technical solution like what Danny was saying, which will come eventually. Yeah, could be cool to have some kind of tactile kind of thing.
You have...
Oh, we've got is that a...
I have a question.
A question?
I've been using the microphone. So I've managed website developments in the past, but now that I work more in the other parts of the business, I'm injecting accessibility into other parts of the business that aren't strictly web projects or online projects. So if you are commissioning a report or something, and one of the likely uses of that report is that it's going to be published online, then I'm saying to people, this should be in your procurement process. This should be in the whole department's procurement process. That if you're producing a report, don't just accept it as a Word doc or a PDF, because over time, as they start sending you infographics or other things as part of the report, you're going to get bigger and bigger workloads as a result of this job that you've outsourced. So that's something I'm kind of chipping away at in my organisations. I guess, is there any, is anyone leading the way here? Has anyone solved that or made good progress or worked with their procurement teams or any of that kind of stuff? Give me hope. Is it happening?
Yeah, so that, because your department has a lot of documents online, isn't it? And same as, I'm not seeing anybody from Faxia or DSS now.
Not any government department.
Yeah, no, not native. But I think they're trying to do some amazing stuff in that space because they've got so much. They get a lot of submissions as well from people who write things in and it's all scanned. So they're trying to deal with those kind of issues as well. So yeah, I'm not sure anybody's from here. Otherwise, it's great to go connect with that department as well as see what they're doing. Which one? Yeah, FOI issues. Oh, that could be a whole topic in its own right. FOI, accessibility. Oh, two conflicting. It's potentially conflicting things. Danny?
So we've done a two-prong approach. The first one is that people aren't actually allowed to publish stuff on our website unless they provide it in two formats that have been optimised for accessibility. And our web team go through and they've started now pulling it apart and making sure that this style that looks like a heading and is called a heading is actually based on a heading.
So your team's doing the verification of that?
Yeah,
okay.
So we've centralised the verification of the accessibility, and if it's wrong, they send it over to me and I engage with the line area and sort of walk them through the process of fixing it. That's for internally developed stuff and externally developed stuff. Of course, we changed the procurement stuff in line with the NTS Phase 2 requirements a couple of years ago, and while the documentation has been updated, people still either decide, you know what, I'm not going to bother calling the web accessibility team, and of course then they go to publish the thing and they've got 3 weeks worth of work to do on the document before they're going to be allowed to publish it. The trick is getting people to put it into the actual contract itself. So we've got some clauses that we've got available on our intranet that we basically, if it's a report that's going to be distributed internally, here's the clause that you use. If it's going to be published on the website, here's the clause that you use. Here's the guidance for the third parties on how to actually do the stuff that we're demanding that they do. And then it's trying to hold third parties to it. You know, we still get a lot of pushback from a lot of the accounting firms, especially trying to say, you know, we can do that for you, but it's going to cost this. And so if you point them back to the fact that A, it's in the contract, and B, it's a legislative requirement on them anyway, suddenly they're willing to accept the fact that we might change their PDF, or, you know, they'll give it to us in Word and things like that. They will budge over time, but we've got to keep asking for it, and we've got to build it into our default procurement processes.
We still get web development companies crying, surprise.
Hilary, do you want to talk about a website that will remain unnamed and the journey around AAA?
Okay. We, following the procurement policies that we had, we actually went out and sought a third-party vendor to assist us to develop a AAA site. And the unfortunate thing is when you ask the question, do you know about accessibility, and the answer comes back, yes, you must dig for more information. Because what actually happened was these people seemed to be quite au fait with WCAG 1 to a point, and WCAG 2 they knew nothing about.
They thought AAA was priority 3 WCAG 1.
Exactly, and it wasn't till we were beginning to travel into testing that, you know, we were constantly liaising with them, but it became apparent that they really didn't understand. So for them, it was a learning journey, and at the end result, this third party knew a lot more about WCAG 2, but I think because, well, we taught them, I guess, but I think that's one thing. It's all well and good talking about procurement and accessibility, but make sure that you really, they find out that they understand what it means and get them to articulate what it means.
So that's a really good story then, isn't it? How do you, not just in your procurement, how do you verify their knowledge and the product as well? When they hand it over to you and go, oh, your website is now AA. You go, oh, thank you. But how do you know? You know, it's because I think that's some of the challenges we've been seeing. Some departments where they may not have the expertise or the resourcing internally to verify, so they rely on the vendor, and the vendor goes, yes, it is, and then they release it, and then it's not. So, so it's a challenge. Yeah. So did it end up extending your project by quite a bit? Like, did it delay things?
Considerably.
Okay.
Yes.
And it's a good learning for other people.
It's good learning for them. I think they restructure their pricing and certainly look at that and take that into account as well.
Okay. Good story, good learning for everyone involved to that one. Okay, any other burning questions? Oh, comment.
First, my name is Carla. Jumping back to the maps, it's not online and it's not accessible to everyone, but there are ways of making tactile maps, so that at least that would be accessible for people who are blind or have low vision. I work with that group, so on the user side of things. And my question is for everyone that's a developer or works on the other side, what would be really useful for you to know about how blind or low vision people use computers or screen readers or any other tech that would help you in your job?
So we've got a few developers here. What's your comment? Mike, you think about your develop. Oh, sorry, Lynn.
You print something out on a braille printer. What, you know, what sort of format is it? Just resolution.
Yeah. You can't just print text into braille. You need another program to transcribe the text into braille. But any text you can just copy and paste into that program to print it on a braille printer. And there are refreshable braille displays, which would probably be more useful. So anything you develop in an accessible way that is accessible for a screen reader, it's also accessible for a braille display. So they can read it on a refreshable display.
Okay. Any other questions? I think any other. Oh, Yumi.
This is. Next question, or are we still?
Next question is good.
Just about RTFs, something that was mentioned before. Are RTFs accessible? Because I know I've read a lot of some places saying that that's an acceptable alternate format. Others say no, it's not. And yeah, just wondering what everyone thinks about them.
We've got lots of vigorous head shaking about our RTF's accessible. Dan, do you want to explain why it's not accessible?
I am going to bring my own microphone next time. RTF, if you look at the DDA advisory notes, there's two specific things about document accessibility that it says really have to be covered. The first one is structure, so heading structure, and the second one is text alternatives for non-text content, for images, things like that. RTF can't natively do either, so there's a caveat on RTF accessibility. RTF is accessible as long as you create it accessibly in Word, save it as an RTF, and open it in nothing but Word. If you open it in WordPad, which is the native RTF creation tool, there's no structure, there's no text alternatives. I don't know what it's like if you open it on a Mac, but in government at least, since we can't show proprietary bias, we can't expect that people will have Word to open it, so we have to accept that people may be opening it on other things which may not carry over the structure and the text alternatives. So, the very first thing that I did when I took over this job was we banned RTF, mainly because, it's such a Microsoft shop thing, and it's kind of an accessibility myth as well. Back in the day, RTF was the done thing for accessibility because RTF meant that you had a true text version. So people were in the habit of scanning documents because that was the new fad. That was a technology that had just come out. And the way to make sure that you had a text version of the letter that a screen reader could read was you provided an RTF as well. We've come a long way since then. We rely on things like navigation by heading and things like that. So it was good for the technology of the day, but it's obsolete.
Okay.
Another format, Excel.
So what's the next question? So we answered RTF. Next question is about Excel.
About Excel? How would you... What kind of issues that people have? Yeah.
Yeah, so for those who didn't hear it, Daniel's saying for the Excel stuff, go to ADOT, which is run by the Canadian, was it government or no? It was the research, it was a organisation that did research and standards.
It's UNESCO and the Ontario government and the Ontario College of Art and Design. So they put together basically WCAG 2AA in a document context, and they cover off Microsoft Office, so Word, Excel, PowerPoint. They cover off OpenOffice, they cover off the Mac ones. And it's basically how to do WCAG 2AA in all of those document formats.
Just
really good instructions.
Yeah, especially if you've got, say, complex tables and you're attaching, I guess maybe you might be considering Excel as an output, as a, as a one alternate format.
Excel has a cell location. So one of the things that's more accessible in Excel than Microsoft Word is Excel has a programmatically determinable location. So it will say you're in B37. So if you think of a table where you've got a merged heading on the left-hand side, and then it breaks down into a number of other headings, and then it breaks down into the data. In Word, if you're in the bottom row and you move back to the start where the merged heading is, and then move back over the other side, you'll start at the top of where that merged cell starts. In Excel, you won't get lost because you always know what your coordinates are. So you can actually do merge cells in Excel and rely on that a lot better than you can do it in Word.
Talk about Excel, that doesn't mean there's an excuse to make a form in Excel that's extremely difficult to use and use it as your alternate format, or use it as the only format. I'm not naming any names, departments. I think that was a case of just they were out of time and they just made a form really quickly. Yeah, that didn't test very well with anyone. Even if it was just from a usability perspective as well, it was just really hard to use. Okay, good question. For alternate format stuff is always interesting, isn't it? Okay, in the last few minutes we've got, we could probably take 2 or 3 questions today. Any other questions? You must have a dying to ask a question. You're too shy, just whisper it to the person next to you and then get them to say it. And one area I'm really interested in is just commentary. It's more of the cognitive disabilities, which is always tricky because the WCAG doesn't cover it particularly well. And so I'm not sure what any tips or comments you guys might have about dealing with cognitive disabilities or impairment, because I know it's such a broad spectrum. So have you ever had to deal with people where, if they're getting older, with there might be issues with reading content in sight or movement as well, when you get affects your cognition, it might also start affecting your mobility as well in some cases. That stuff is always interesting. Yeah, so then has anybody ever had to deal with specific questions around cognitive disabilities? No? Oh, lucky.
I think getting people to write better.
Write better.
So far, that's the only thing I've done. So stop talking like you're a government department. Start talking like you're just communicating something.
So what Gavin's saying, stop talking like your government department, start talking, and start communicating properly. And that usually means simple, plain English, front-loading things. All our content writers among us would say this is kind of basic content writing that we just don't seem to really do.
I think that's also a good example of accessibility not being just for people with, vision problems or anything. It's just one of those things that has benefit for all users.
Yeah.
And to achieve your business goals, whatever they are, just communicate.
Communicate well, simply. Yeah, communicate well. That's a good tip. Communicate well, communicate simply. Particularly in a way English is not people's first language. In Australia, we're such a multicultural country. You might have people who are born overseas where English, they don't speak English at home, or if you got friends who are deaf, if English is not your first language, usually sign language Auslan is your first language. So you've got those kind of cultural challenges as well. So it benefits everyone. So communicate simply.
Does everyone have to turn on readability stats in Word? Because that's usually if you show them. Often if you get that sort of problem and they're pushing back, just get them to turn on the readability stats, and if they get a 23 or a 24, it's probably too high. That's your second PhD sort of level. We'll often do that and then show them the ABS stats that basically say that just under 50% of Australians have a reading level at year 7 or below. So they're aiming for a 7 and they're getting, high 20s often.
How does the readability
work? It's based on it's a Flesch-Kincaid readability grade. Flesch and Kincaid were a couple of psychologists in the US Navy that pioneered this stuff. And it's really just a maths formula that counts up. Technically it's supposed to be the number of syllables per word, but I think Word uses the number of characters per word. And it looks at the number of words per sentence and the number of sentences per paragraph. And those three stats, average number of characters per word, average number of sentences per paragraph, things like that, come up in the readability stats as well as the actual grade. This is a year 7 document or this is a year 37 document. So you can get them to reduce the readability grade, make it simpler by reducing the number of words per sentence or the number of sentences per paragraph, or use smaller words.
Okay. Any final tips? Questions, Yuri?
One thing that wasn't mentioned was having descriptive link text, and I was thinking about that picture you had, and not only is it inside the car, but often you see ads like that and you rip it off and you don't know what it's for. So it's kind of similar, having a bit context. I suppose that's really important.
You can explain what happens if you don't have context. So just say, for example, the usual click here. What happens? Why is it not very good?
Or if someone's using a screen reader, for example, they won't. It'll just go. They won't know what they're actually clicking to. For example, there's it's very difficult for people with screen readers using a screen reader.
So if that's not familiar with screen readers, some screen reader users tend to, they navigate in different ways. But one of the ways is pulling up a list of links and just navigating quickly through that. So having 3 links sound exactly the same and going through different locations is very, very confusing. And it means it just slows people down. Yeah, that's a good tip, the nice basic tip of the click here. And another basic tip as well is the colour stuff, the colour contrast. Just you know, when you get young designers, they've got perfect eyesight, and all these really sexy colours of grey on black or grey on white, because it's very Apple. It looks beautiful, except the fact that half the population can't really see it very well. So I know it looks sexy, but let's think about our broader group. I'm noticing that as I get older, I'm going, oh, let's increase the font size a bit. Control plus, control plus. Yeah, so those kind of little simple things, makes a huge difference for a lot of people. I think particularly because when our abilities, as we get older, our abilities decline. You don't think of yourself as getting older, and you don't, you sort of go, oh, I just find it harder to see. So that's a good one.
We actually do a little bit of a segment on this in the training that I run, and some of the stats are really mind-boggling. Your eyes start to degenerate when you hit about 40. And by the time you're 60, you're only processing about 40% of the amount of light that you were processing when you were 20. By the time you're 80, you're processing 15% of the light. So if you think about...
old sucks.
Yeah, pretty much. And 70 to 80% of our sensory receptors are in the back of our eyes. So our primary sense is degenerating by that much. That's how important colour contrast is with an ageing population.
Particularly those of you working in communication branches, when it comes to doing a new brand or new colour schemes, and you go out to your design agencies, please be aware of those, particularly your audience, if you've got an older, ageing population, Yeah, and picking, no, health and aging, that's right. And I'm picking like a bright yellow and white might be a bit tricky. And,
I have a question regarding colour contrast. Has anyone had experience working within an existing brand that doesn't meet the colour contrasts? And how do you negotiate around that when you have clients who are essentially very fixed on using their brand, even though you've explained to them that it can't meet the requirements?
Good question.
Okay, any colour theory nerds in the room? Okay. First of all, there's no option. They will change their stuff to make it conformant. It's a policy rule that we implement and we don't give them the leniency. But you can maintain the palette by just darkening it within the range. So if you think of a standard sort of HSV swatch, actually I'll explain that. There's a few different aspects of colour. If you think of a cylinder, and around the outside you sort of go between red, orange, yellow, green, purple, and then back to red. The angle is called the hue. So the palette for branding is basically a number of angles on that wheel. In the middle of the circle is all white, and down the bottom of the cylinder is all black. So if you think of a cross-section of that cylinder and just one half of that cross-section, on one side you've got white going all the way down to black, and then on the other side you've got the pure colour going all the way down to black. And every single colour in the RGB spectrum is just a crosshair in one of those swatches. Now, to maintain the colour, the best way we've found so far is you sort of draw a line from the bottom corner with no saturation and no lightness, so it's the black corner on the white side, not the colour side, up to the crosshair, and then visualise a perpendicular line. And if you need to darken it, then you darken it and increase the saturation at the same time. So you can basically get a colour in the same branding that's just slightly darker, so they don't have to change their logo. They just have to meet the minimum contrast requirements with that particular colour. And the only thing it really fails on is yellow, because you get oranges and browns and stuff.
Lime green?
Yeah, bright green we haven't had as much problem with. It's not as vibrant, but, you know.
I recently got given the style guide that no matter what I could do, it was dull.
The Contrast A website on Desplankton is awesome for that.
Cool. Okay, any other final comments on colour? Text sizes? Careful, in our last few... choose your font wisely. Do you want to expand on that comment? With what do you mean by that one? So no Comic Sans?
Yeah, I recently became familiar with a font from the Sketchblock family, which is like... It's... how do you say, it's not completely opaque through the whole letter. So yeah, the colour contrast, dealing with that against different backgrounds was an interesting experience. Yeah.
Good one. That's a good tip. Okay. Well, to wrap up, I want to say thank you very much for coming along, everyone. And my final tip for all of you is that at the end of the day, no matter how much technical requirements that you meet with accessibility, ask yourself and ask your business people and your people in the product, can somebody actually use it? Because you can technically meet all these technical tick boxes things, but if somebody still can't complete the task they're doing, sorry, that's my Doctor Who. If somebody can't actually do the task, then it's really hard, it's accessible for hardly anybody then. So that's kind of our usability, user experience tip. Make a good user experience that delights people. And part of that will be an accessible, inclusive experience. Yeah. So thank you very much for coming along, everyone. I appreciate your time. I know it's after work. For those who want to hang around, we're going to pack up the chairs really quickly, so they're all nice and neat for the library. So thank you. I think this will be online, maybe? Yes, it would be. So Gavin's going to go.
Hopefully most of it.
Yeah. And I think we're looking at trying to find a transcription service to do this. I'm not sure how much it's going to cost. So if you've got any, you want to throw $1 or $2 or so.
It costs about $1 per minute, I think, depending on where you go. If anyone's got any new...
We donate time to just...
Donate time to transcribe, maybe that's an option as well.
We split on how to use subtitle edit, which is step by step and that's just
Yeah.
If as a group people want to coordinate subtitling, that'd be great.
Maybe it's a good little workshop on how to subtitle it. Maybe that could be its own little session.
Next time we can talk about how we did it.
Yeah, we did it, and how we all went with transcribing bits and uploading captions. So that'd be a nice little hands-on.
Be ambitious and try real time.
Real time, wow, okay. Maybe we can aim that as part of our, as we get more experience with the assessment over the course of this year, we'll start doing that. Maybe we set ourselves challenges and go back to work and say, we tried, live transcription, hey. I'll have to speak slower. Well, but thank you very much for your time. And maybe, as Carl was saying, we can try to aim for a group transcription effort and see what the experience is like for transcribing something and putting it online. Thank you for your time. And yeah, the next one will be held next month away. And I'm not sure what the topic is. So we're aiming for a topic every session now, except for one every quarter where will be a social at the pub somewhere. So we'll still have our social event somewhere, but the rest of the year would be topic-based one. So thank you for your time. Thank you, Gavin.
Are you coming here, or are you interested in moving it around?
We're not sure yet. I think we've tentatively booked the library. Does this sort of work for people? Ish? Yeah, it works for people who works in the city. We've also potentially got a location in Barton for some of our, because some of the other departments are based in that area, and there's actually a location there that will become available shortly. So people can just walk from your department straight across the road. So we might alternate between that and here as well. Cool. And also, if you've got any ideas on speaking, because I think we're looking for a Drupal accessibility expert as well, because there's lots of questions we're getting about Drupal. People keep asking, can we talk about it at the forum? So if you know somebody, can you please let us know, or even a panel of people, so we can keep shooting questions like this. I think that's one of our upcoming ones. We just got to find somebody. So, cool. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.